Hello everyone, Shintobean here discussing some Age of Sigmar rules. We're looking at the new rules from the General's Handbook 2023 to 2024. These will be in effect for an entire year. And once again, like I did with previous General Handbooks, I have made some reference cards. If there are any mistakes, please let me know in the comments. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So, starting off with the Realm rules. The focus has shifted away from Galatian champions and is now on Andorian locuses. Now these are non-unique wizard heroes with a wounds characteristic of 9 or less, and these guys are the focus for many of the new battle tactics and also have access to the lore of Primal Frost, which we will be getting to later. The second rule on the left there, optimal focus. So at the start of the battle round, the player who's taken the second turn can pick one Andorian locus to get an extra cast and unbind. So they can do one of each in each turn. And if the hero is not an Andorian locus, you can get one command point for that hero to use during that battle round. And then the other big thing is primal magic. So this is a new mechanic that helps you to cast spells, but there's a little bit of a risk involved. So at the start of the hero phase, both players roll a dice, and for each 4+, each player gains one primal magic dice, which can be rolled after either a casting or unbinding or dispelling, and then you just add that to the result. And you can actually continue to roll more dice as long as you don't miscast. Any abilities or effects that would cause you to re-roll the casting roll or dispelling roll must be done before deciding to use the primal magic dice, and you can't use those dice to modify the re-rolls. And then rolling doubles can have a pretty big effect here when using these primal magic dice. If you roll double ones, not only does the spell fail, but you will suffer D3 plus 3 mortal wounds to the wizard who is doing the casting, and then D3 mortal wounds to all units within 3 inches, and that wizard can no longer cast any more spells that turn. So it's just a crazier version of a miscast, and of course the more dice you roll, the higher the chance of rolling double ones. Now if you don't roll any ones in the initial 2d6, then you can safely roll one extra primal magic dice at least, without any chance of a primal miscast. Double sixes result in the spell being unable to be unbound, but that wizard can no longer cast any more spells that turn, and both players get one additional primal magic dice. So again, very interesting mechanic, high risk, high reward, and we will see with some of the new spells in the lore of Primal Frost, some of them have very high casting values, so you will need to use the primal magic dice in most situations in order to cast those. Now moving on to some new command traits, which are specific to Andorian locuses. So the first one, Shaman of the Chilled Lands. The wizard knows all spells from the lore of Primal Frost, all 3 of those spells on the right side. And the next one, Eye of the Blizzard. At the start of your hero phase, you gain 1 extra primal magic dice on a roll of a 5+. The third one, Chilled to the Bone. Once per battle, ignore the effects of a miscast or primal miscast on a 3+. And then the final one, Eater of Magic. So every time your wizard successfully unbinds a spell, you roll a dice, and on a 5+, the wizard that was casting that spell can no longer knows the spell and can't cast it for the remainder of the battle. Moving on, we've got 2 new battalions. The first one, Andorian Acolytes. This consists of 2 to 3 champions. Champions are basically the same thing as the Galatian champions from the previous book. So non-unique, non-mounted heroes with 9 or less wounds. Of course, in order to have any effect, they also have to be wizards. So at the start of the hero phase, so this is in both players' turns, if you have 2 or more Andorian locuses from this battalion on the field, gain 1 extra primal magic dice on a roll of a 3+. And then the second battalion, Magic Hunters, consists of 1 champion and 1 infantry unit, with the possibility of adding an additional infantry and 1 monster, which is a non-heroic behemoth. So each time a unit in this battalion fights a wizard in combat, you can go on a wizard hunt, which you choose one of the weapons and give +1 to the attack characteristic. However, all attacks made by that unit must target a wizard, and no wizards can join the Magic Hunters Battalion. Moving on, we've got some new enhancements, the Nullstone Adornments. So these can only be taken if you have no wizards in your starting army, but it is a free extra enhancement for those armies. The first one, the Nullstone Icon, allows the bearer to unbind or dispel one spell in the enemy hero phase, and if you successfully unbind it, then you can do it one more time and just keep going. The second one, the Pouch of Null Dust. This is just an anti-magic bomb. Once per battle, you activate it at the start of the hero phase to cause miscasts on double 1s, 2s, and 3s until the end of the phase. And if any primal magic dice were used, it causes a primal miscast. Drastically increases the likelihood of miscasting spells, and also you roll a dice for each endless spell on the battlefield at the time, and on a 5+ it is dispelled. And then the third adornment, the Nullstone Pebble. So when the bearer is targeted by a spell, you can redirect the effect to another unit within 3 inches. And if there are no units within 3 inches, you just ignore the effects on a 4+. So you can choose when to use this. So if you're being targeted by an enemy spell, you can use this. If you're buffing the unit with your own spell, you don't have to use the ability here. And then we've got the Lure of Primal Frost. So again, only for Antdorian Locust wizards. There are 3 spells here. You can choose one of these spells for them to know instead of a spell from the lore that they normally use. The first one, Hoarfrost, casts on an 8+ and has a 12-inch range. You pick one melee weapon on the target unit and roll a d3, and then you can change the hit, wound, or rend value to the result rolled until the start of your next hero phase. So for example, on the d3, if you roll a 3, you could change the rend to rend -3. If you roll a 1, you could change the hit or wound roll to a 1+. Of course, unmodified ones still miss, but it seems like a pretty decent buffing spell there. And the next one, Rupture, casts on a 10+ and has 18-inch range. You pick one predatory endless spell or incarnate, wholly within range, and it becomes wild and can no longer be controlled for the rest of the battle. And then the final one, Blizzard, can deal massive damage. It casts on a 12+ and has a 12-inch range which cannot be extended by any abilities. It also must be cast from the wizard itself, so you can't cast it through a portal or anything like that. But it deals 46 mortal wounds to the visible target, but any roll of 1 causes d3 mortal wounds back to the casting wizard, which cannot be negated. Moving on, we've got entirely new grand strategies and battle tactics. So looking at the grand strategies first, the first one, Control the Nexus. So you have to finish the battle with 2 or more friendly wizards wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. And the next one, Spellcasting Savant. Your general must be an Antdorian Locust and survive until the end of the battle. The third one, Slaughter of Sorcery. No wizards must be on the battlefield when the battle ends. The fourth one, Barren Icescape. All enemy units with artifacts of power must be dead, and no enemy units must be within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield in order to achieve that one. The next one, Overshadow. So you have to destroy all enemy battle line units, and you also need to have 1 or more battle line units from your starting army still on the field by the end of the battle. And then the final one, Magic Made Manifest. You have to end the battle with 2 or more endless spells or incarnates controlled or bonded by your units. Moving on to the battle tactics, the first one, Intimidate the Invaders. So you need more friendly units wholly outside your territory than wholly within your territory by the end of the turn. The second one, Reprisal. So for this one, you have to destroy an enemy unit which destroyed your general during this game. It doesn't have to be that turn, just any time that game, you have to exact vengeance on the unit that killed your general. The third one is pretty wordy, Endless Expropriation. You pick one enemy unit that controls or is bonded to an endless spell or incarnate, and you complete the tactic if one of the following is true. Either you destroy that unit that is controlling the spell, or if the endless spell is wild or controlled by you, or if the incarnate is wild at the end of the turn, then you get that tactic. And the next one, Magical Dominance. You get this one if a friendly wizard successfully cast at least one spell and none of your spells were unbound that turn. The next one, Magical Mayhem. You designate an enemy unit and you have to destroy it by damage inflicted by spells or endless spells from that turn. And the next one, Bait and Trap. You have to retreat with 2 or more friendly units, and then you have to successfully charge with 2 or more other units. So they have to be different units there. So 4 units in total required for this tactic. And the next one, Led into the Maelstrom. For this one, you need 1 or more heroes and 1 or more battle line units to successfully charge, and then at least one of those units that charged must remain within 3 inches of an enemy unit at the end of the turn. And then the final one, Surround and Destroy. For this one, you pick 3 of your friendly units, and you complete the tactic if each of them is wholly within 6 inches of a different battlefield edge, and 2 or more of those units are wholly outside your territory. Now, moving on to the battle plan. I've categorized these basically with battle plans with a similar deployment zones going together, and I'll just go through them very quickly. So the first one on the left, the Geomantic Pulse. So for this one, at the start of the second battle round, the player going second chooses either Objective A or Objective B to be the Pulse. And then the Pulse moves to the adjacent objective in each subsequent battle round. So, for example, if you chose A, it would move to the right each battle round, finally ending up at point B. At the end, objectives can't be moved by other effects, but the Pulse is what your units are going to be chasing, because you can score extra victory points for controlling the Pulse or controlling objectives adjacent to the Pulse. The next one, Lines of Communication, has 3 objectives, and at the start of each battle round, the player going second chooses a phase to disrupt. And each time a command is issued during that phase, and this is during both players' turns, so if for example, you could pick the hero phase or the combat phase or shooting phase, and each time the player issues a command during that phase, the player going second rolls a dice, and on a 3+, that player must spend an additional command point in order to issue the command. So they can choose whether to issue that command for 2 CP, or if they don't want to, they lose the CP and the command is still issued but not received by the unit. And then it just has standard scoring for victory points. And then the third one on the right, Fountains of Frost. This has 6 objectives, and at the start of the Battle Shock phase, if an objective is contested by 3 or more units, each unit on that objective takes D3 mortal wounds. On a 4+, you roll for each unit contesting that objective. And also, Andorian Locusts count as 10 models for the purposes of contesting objectives on this one. Again, standard scoring for the victory points. Moving on to the next 3, we've got No Reward Without Risk. For this one, you'll have some exploding wizards. Each time a wizard dies, on a 4+, it blows up, dealing D3 mortal wounds to all units within a number of inches equal to that wizard's wounds characteristic. So if Lord Croak dies, everything within 18 inches will be taking mortal wounds on a 4+. And standard scoring for the victory points there. Next one, the Frigid Zephyr. So for this one, we've got 3 objectives, and at the start of the battle, there is a squall, like a big storm, that prevents units from being able to see each other if they are more than 12 inches away, and it also prevents all units from flying. And this storm persists until you are able to dissipate it with a roll, which takes place at the start of each battle round after the first. So you roll a d6 and add the number of the current battle round to that, and on a 7+, the squall goes away. Standard scoring for the victory points. And then Nexus Collapse. This one has 6 objectives, kind of weird positioning on them. And the rule is instability, so at the start of each battle round after the first, the player with the fewest victory points can collapse up to 2 objectives on the field. If players are tied for victory points, you roll off and the winner can collapse up to 1 objective. And then you roll for each unit within 6 inches of the objective. They take D3 mortal wounds on a 4+, and then after all of the rolling, you remove the objective from the field. Standard scoring for this one as well. The next ones have very big deployment zones, so the territories take up the entire field. For power flux, we've got Aether Surges. The player going second chooses which pair of objectives are active for that battle round, so either the A objectives or the B objectives. And then you can only contest objectives that have been activated during that round. So you get 1 victory point for controlling one of the objectives. You get an additional victory point if you control both. You get 1 more victory point for each activated objective contested by your Antorian Locust, as long as there are no enemy Antorian Locusts contesting it. And then you also get 1 victory point, I believe at the end of the battle round, if enemy wizards were destroyed during that battle round. And then 2 points for the tactic. In the center, we've got limited resources, 6 objectives. So when you control an objective with a unit in this one, they start to siphon the meltwater from the objective. And then after scoring victory points, players can no longer control an objective that was controlled for 2 consecutive turns. They can still contest it though to prevent the opponent from controlling it. So you'll have to keep track of which of those objectives you have siphoned all the meltwater off of. Standard scoring for the victory points on that one. And then we've got Towers in the Tundra. So for this one, you have to actually include 2 small to medium-sized defensible terrain features and put 1 in each territory. And then each player chooses either 1 defensible structure or a faction terrain feature to be their Wizard's Tower. And that scenery piece has the Arcane Scenery rule in addition to all other rules it has. And then for the victory points, you get 1 for controlling 1 objective, an additional 1 for controlling both objectives. You get 2 for the battle tactic, and then at the end of the game, you get another 2 victory points if your tower is garrisoned by friendly units or is under your control if you didn't have any units that can garrison the terrain feature. You also get 2 victory points if the enemy tower is not garrisoned by any units. And then we've got some more battle plans with different sized deployment zones. For Spring the Trap, after deployment, starting with the attacker, each player can remove D3 units and put them in reserve. So you roll once for both players, so both players will have the option to remove the same number of units from the field. And then from the second battle round, you can deep strike with those units wholly within 6 inches of a table edge and more than 9 inches away from enemies at the end of your movement phase. And then you got standard scoring for the victory points. The next one, the Ice Fields, has 6 objectives, and we got some slippery ice on the field. Anytime a unit runs, it takes D3 mortal wounds, and each time a unit charges, for each unmodified roll of 1 on the charge, the unit takes D3 mortal wounds as well. So be careful when running on ice. And then finally, every step is forward. We've got 4 objectives here, and the rule is give no ground. If a unit charges, each model counts as 1 more model for the purposes of contesting the objective until the end of the turn, but if a unit retreats, it cannot contest objectives at all for the remainder of that turn. So that is all of the new rules in a nutshell. Hopefully no errors there. Let me know what you think. And hopefully these cards are useful. Feel free to, print them out and use them in your games. But that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.